You sit at your desk, the cursor blinking on a half-finished report, and you feel it. A low-grade dread that has nothing to do with the work itself. It's the calendar notification you've been ignoring. The one that says mid-year performance review, prep required. Your chest tightens, your stomach knots, and you wonder why a simple conversation about your work feels more like a psychological evaluation than a business discussion. Here's the part nobody tells you about that feeling. It's not your fault. It's not because you're insecure or underqualified. It's because the performance review, the ritual you submit to every 6 or 12 months, was never designed to help you improve. It was designed to measure you, categorize you, and place you inside a system that treats human output like a machine's throughput. And that system has a specific, traceable origin story, one that goes back over a century to a man with a stopwatch and a clipboard. That man was Frederick Winslow Taylor, and in 1911, he published a book from New York called The Principles of Scientific Management. Inside it, he laid out something he called the differential piece rate system. It sounds dry. It was revolutionary. And it was the first time anyone had systematically attempted to measure an individual worker's output and link that measurement directly to a formal evaluation and a pay rate. Before Taylor, work was judged by experience, by reputation, by the quality of the thing produced. After Taylor, work became a number on a chart. Now Taylor wasn't operating in a vacuum. He was solving a problem that American industrialists had been complaining about since the 1890s. Workers, left to their own devices, would pace themselves. They'd deliberately slow down to avoid exhausting themselves or revealing how fast they could actually go. Factory owners called this soldiering. Taylor called it a disease. And his cure was the performance review, a clinical, timed, quantified breakdown of every movement a worker made, every second they spent, every unit they produced. So, that knot in your stomach today? It started with a man timing a steel worker in Pennsylvania more than 110 years ago. But here's where the story pivots in a way you don't expect. Taylor's system swept through American factories, then through the rest of the world. By the early 20s, his scientific management was the dominant philosophy in industrial organization. But it had a blind spot. It worked brilliantly for repetitive physical labor, shoveling coal, tightening bolts, assembling standardized parts. It had no idea what to do with a manager, a salesperson, a creative professional, or a knowledge worker. The system was built for bodies, not for minds. Enter Peter F. Drucker. In 1936, 25 years after Taylor, Drucker published a book called The Practice of Management in New York. Drucker looked at the problem and decided that what Taylor had done for factory hands, he would do for executives. He invented a term you've probably heard, management by objectives, or MBO. Drucker's idea was elegant on paper. Instead of timing movements, you would set quarterly objectives. You would hold a formal appraisal meeting to compare your results against what you promised. You and your boss would agree on the gap, and then you'd set new objectives for the next quarter. It sounds reasonable. It sounds fair. But look closer at what Drucker actually recommended. He argued that the appraisal meeting should include a written evaluation of the employee's character, their work habits, their relationships with colleagues, and their potential for future promotion. The moment you evaluate character inside a quarterly business review, you have turned a financial conversation into a moral judgment. That's exactly the moment the trap was set. Drucker repackaged personal judgment as objective performance, and we're still sitting in those review chairs feeling like our character is on trial. If you want to keep uncovering how these systems were designed to measure what they can't see, subscribe so you don't miss the next piece of the puzzle. And before you move on, drop a word in the comments. Tell us, have you ever been evaluated on your character at work? And did it feel like a verdict? And here's the irony. Drucker, later in his career, became one of the most vocal critics of the very system he helped create. He warned that MBO, when applied rigidly, becomes a tyranny of targets. He said it encourages managers to hit numbers at the expense of everything else, teamwork, innovation, even ethics. But by the time his warning circulated, the system had already spread beyond the private sector into the machinery of government itself. Consider what happened in 1954. The United States Army, after years of internal studies, rolled out its performance evaluation system across all branches. It standardized a written rating form with a scale from 1 to 5. By 1960, that system covered more than 1 million soldiers. The military had a problem that mirrors your own. How do you evaluate thousands of people doing thousands of different jobs fairly? Their answer was the same as Taylor's and Drucker's: standardize everything, reduce the individual to a score, and trust the system to produce the right outcomes. But here's the part the military knew that corporate America conveniently ignored. The Army's own internal audits showed that the rating scale produced a predictable problem: inflation. For a soldier to be rated a 4, they had to be genuinely exceptional. Most officers, reluctant to damage careers, gave their subordinates a 4 anyway. Within a decade, the scale was meaningless. Everyone was above average. The system collapsed under the weight of its own social pressure. Fast forward to 1974. The United Kingdom Civil Service, influenced by the Fulton Report, adopted its annual performance review, or APR. The mandate was clear: every civil servant, from the lowest clerk to the highest permanent secretary, would receive a written appraisal each year. That appraisal would determine promotion and pay. It was supposed to create meritocracy. What it actually created was a bureaucratic nightmare of paperwork, politicking, and anxiety that spread from Whitehall to every public office in the country. So, by 1999, when the Center for Creative Leadership in the United States released its 360-degree feedback handbook, the corporate world was ready for something new. The idea was seductive. Instead of one boss evaluating you, you'd be judged by your subordinates, your peers, your customers, and your supervisor combined. A holistic score, a complete picture. By 2002, 58% of Fortune 500 firms had piloted some version of 360-degree feedback. And then something strange happened. The data came back. Researchers found that 360-degree feedback didn't improve performance in most cases. It often made things worse. People who received negative feedback from multiple sources didn't improve. They withdrew, resented the process, or focused only on the behaviors that got them higher scores while neglecting everything else. The system, which was supposed to be fairer, turned out to be just a more elaborate version of the old rating sheet from 1954. Now, let me take you inside the psychological machinery of the review itself, because this is where the real story lives. In 1996, two researchers, Kluger and Denisi, published a meta-analysis in the Journal of Applied Psychology. They analyzed 84 independent studies involving more than 11,000 participants. Their question was simple: does feedback actually improve performance? Their answer was complicated. On average, feedback improved performance by about 41% of a standard deviation. That sounds positive. But when they looked closer, they found a dark asymmetry. Negative feedback, when delivered without a growth frame, without a clear path forward, actually reduced performance, not by a little. The effect size was 22% of a standard deviation in the wrong direction. That means the review you dreaded, the one where your manager pointed out your weaknesses without telling you how to fix them, didn't just hurt your feelings. It made you measurably worse at your job for weeks afterward. That 22% reduction in performance is not a statistic. It is a lived experience for millions of workers every review cycle. If you want to understand the hidden machinery that shapes your work life, subscribe. We are only beginning to pull back the curtain. Drop a comment with the word asymmetry if you have ever felt your performance drop after a review that offered no path forward. Your brain's threat response is not your fault. It is a design flaw in the system. The mechanism behind this is something called the threat response. When you receive negative feedback, your brain treats it as a social threat. The same regions that activate when you face physical danger, the anterior cingulate cortex, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, light up. Your cortisol levels rise. Your cognitive capacity narrows. You stop learning. You stop being creative. You go into survival mode. And survival mode is terrible for complex, collaborative, creative work. 3 years later, in 1999, Edward Deci, Richard Kausner, and Richard Ryan published a different meta-analysis in Psychological Bulletin. They looked at 128 experiments involving around 7,500 participants. Their question was about intrinsic motivation, the internal drive to do good work because the work itself is satisfying. What they found should have changed corporate HR forever. Performance contingent feedback, the kind that ties your evaluation to a specific numerical outcome, decreased intrinsic motivation by 23% of a standard deviation. The effect was statistically significant and consistent across age groups, industries, and cultures. The more you tie someone's self-worth to a review score, the less they care about the actual work. They stop asking, "Is this interesting?" and start asking, "Will this get me a higher rating?" And then there's the question of fairness. In 2001, Jason Colquitt and his team published a meta-analysis on organizational justice in the Journal of Applied Psychology. They analyzed 45 studies with tens of thousands of participants. Their finding was brutal. Perceptions of fairness in performance appraisal processes were the strongest predictor of job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and intent to stay. But here's the catch. People's perception of fairness wasn't based on their actual rating. It was based on whether they believed the process was transparent, consistent, and applied equally. And here's what the EEOC realized in 2015, when it released its guidance on performance appraisal and disparate impact. Rating scales with something called the halo effect, where a manager's general impression of an employee colors every specific rating they give, can produce statistically significant disparate impact on protected groups. In plain English, your review isn't just unfair. In many cases, it's illegal. The reason is baked into human psychology. When a manager sits down to evaluate you, they don't separate your performance from their feelings about you. They don't separate your recent project from your mistake 6 months ago. The brain, to save energy, relies on heuristics, mental shortcuts, and those shortcuts systematically penalize people who are different from the evaluator in race, gender, age, or personality. The review process doesn't measure your work. It measures your manager's perception of your work, which is a very different thing. Now, here's where the story gets personal. This is the moment where the research stops being academic and starts being about the desk where you're sitting right now. You've probably had a manager who seemed fair, maybe even kind, but the system they were using to evaluate you wasn't fair. It couldn't be, because the review itself is a contradiction. It tries to measure something that can't be measured: human potential, collaborative contribution, creative insight, using tools designed for factory output. And then it feeds that measurement back to you in a way that triggers your brain's threat response, reduces your motivation, and damages your relationship with your work and your colleagues. Consider what happens in the weeks after your review. You know the drill. You walk out of the meeting with a rating, a list of areas for improvement, and a vague sense that something was missing. You go back to your desk. You open your email, and you feel, not inspired, not clear, but quietly, persistently, wrong. You don't have a word for it, but now you do. The research calls it feedback-induced performance suppression. The system that was supposed to help you improve has, in measurable ways, made you worse. And here's the most painful part. The people who run this system aren't malicious. They inherited it. Their managers inherited it from the generation before. The chain goes back through Drucker, through the Army, through the British Civil Service, all the way to Taylor, standing in a Pennsylvania factory with a stopwatch, convinced that if he could just measure everything, he could control everything. But you can't control a human being the way you control a machine. When you try, the human beings adapt in ways the machine never could. They sandbag their targets. They game the metrics. They hide their best ideas because a brilliant innovation that doesn't fit into this quarter's objectives looks like a failure on the review form. This is the moment when the narrative inverts, because there is a different story hiding inside this mess. A story about what happens when you remove the performance review. In 2005, Google launched an internal project called Project Oxygen. The researchers meant to confirm what everyone already believed, that technical skill was the most important predictor of manager effectiveness. What they found instead is that the managers who scored highest on employee net promoter scores, those who were seen as the most effective, shared one thing in common. They held regular, structured one-on-one conversations, not annual reviews, not quarterly form fillings. Weekly, focused, forward-looking conversations about what the employee needed to succeed. That one change improved manager effectiveness by 12%, not through evaluation, through support. Now consider the meta-analytic finding that feedback improves performance overall by 41%. The effect is real, but the delivery mechanism matters more than the information itself. If you feel safe, if the feedback is tied to a growth mindset, if your manager is asking, "What do you need to do your best work?" instead of, "Where did you fall short?" the threat response doesn't activate. The learning centers open, and you actually improve. The tragedy of the performance review system is that it contains the seed of its own destruction. Taylor was right that measurement matters. Drucker was right that objectives matter. But they both missed the variable that modern neuroscience has made unmistakable: The emotional context of the evaluation determines whether the information helps or harms. You can feel that context in your own body right now. Think about the last time someone told you something you needed to hear, but they told you with respect, with curiosity, with the assumption that you were already trying your best. You didn't feel defensive. You felt motivated. Now think about the last performance review where you sat across from someone who had already written your score before you walked in. You felt the difference immediately. That difference isn't just emotional, it's biological. It's the difference between feedback that improves performance by 41% and feedback that reduces it by 22%. So, where does this leave you? It leaves you with a choice that most people never realize they have. You can continue to treat the performance review as an accurate measure of your worth. You can let the knot in your stomach dictate how you feel about your contribution. Or you can step back and see the system for what it is, a historical artifact, a management technology designed more than a century ago for factory floors, applied to knowledge work without ever being tested for that context, and known for decades to produce precisely the opposite of its stated purpose. The truth is, you already know that the review doesn't capture the best of you. It captures the most measurable part of you, and the most measurable part is rarely the most valuable part. The quiet collaboration you offered a colleague last week, the problem you solved before anyone else saw it coming, the idea you had in the shower that never made it onto a spreadsheet. None of that fits on a 1 to 5 scale. But here's the question I want you to hold for the rest of this video, not as a rhetorical exercise, but as an actual experiment. Imagine you walk into your next performance review, and the person across the table says, "I don't care about your rating. I care about what you need to do your best work. Tell me what that is." How would you answer? And more importantly, what would change in your work if that question became the entire purpose of the conversation? The researchers at Google found that this single shift, from evaluation to support, changed everything. The reviews themselves became less important. The relationship became more important. The performance improvement followed naturally, not because someone measured it, but because someone enabled it. You don't have to wait for your company to change. You can reframe the conversation from your side. You can walk into your next review prepared to ask questions instead of defend answers. You can say, "Before we look at the objectives from last quarter, can we talk about what would make this next quarter different? Not harder, different. What would I need to feel like the work matters?" That question short-circuits the threat response. It reframes the entire interaction. It turns an evaluation into a collaboration. And it reveals in real time how much of the review system's power is psychological rather than structural. The power isn't in the form. It's in the expectation that the form matters. You've been sitting through these reviews your entire career, carrying a weight that was never yours to carry. The system was built for you to fail it, not for it to serve you. But now you know the history. You know the research. You know that your resistance isn't weakness. It's the healthy response of a brain that recognizes an unfair game. The only question left is what you do with that knowledge when you close this video, open your calendar, and see that notification waiting for you.